The birth of the tank can be dated all the way back to the 18th century. The tank brought a new style of warfare. It enabled the military to have a larger impact from longer distances, but can also move into close combat since most had a machine gun mounted. The frame and type of tanks had grown and changed in the years. Although the first tank wasn't ready for combat until 1916, some were created as early as 1770. This podcast will include topics such as the evolution, progression, and the success of the tank.
The Landships Committee, the Inventions Committee, and Colonel Swinton agreed the design of the new weapon. This design remained nameless. They commissioned Lieutenant Wilson from the Naval Air Service and William Triton and from William Foster & Co. produced the first landship in secret. It was given code name in December of 1915. They called it the tank because of the shape of the shell resembled water carriers. The tank stuck. Swinton made sure key criteria were part of the finished design. The tank had to have a boast of minimum speed of 4 miles per hour, be able to climb a 5-foot-high obstacle, successfully span a 5-foot trench, and be immune to the effects of small fire. It also had to have 2 machine guns, have a range of 20 miles, and be maintained by a crew of 10 men. This first tank was given the nickname Little Willie. It possessed a Daimler engine. It weighed 14 tons and bearing 12 feet long track frames. The tank could carry 3 people in cramped conditions. Its top speed was only 3 miles per hour on level ground and 2 miles per hour on rough terrain, which were the conditions of most battlefields. Little Willie was restricted that it was unable to cross trenches.
The British were the first to use the tanks on September 15, 1916, against Germany in battle at Delville Wood. The commander-in-chief of the British Army deployed tanks before making sure they were ready to battle the trenchment. Early tanks were very unreliable and they were very hot, and the tank fumes nearly choked the men inside. In April of 1917, the French tried out the tank, and the French tanks were even more unreliable than the ones created by the British. Australia also tried using tanks but were unhappy with its performance. Tanks were used in the Third Battle of Ypres, but they sank into the mud of the swamps. However, the military medal was given to Private A. Smith, a tank operator, for his actions at Delville Wood.
The first original combat tank was ready by January of 1916 and was demonstrated to a high-powered audience. Lloyd George, the Minister of Munitions, was convinced by the evolutionary machine and ordered production of the heavy Mark I model to begin. Meanwhile, the French, knowing the British have started tank experimentation, proceeded with their own designs. They remained skeptical to its success. The focus for the French at the time was on the production of even more battlefield artillery. Nevertheless, French had their own Colonel Swinton. Yes, they had a man named Colonel Eston. Eston managed to convince the French commander-in-chief, Joseph Joffre, of the battlefield success of the tank as an aid to the infantry. Joffre, a champion of the offensive spirit, agreed with the result that an initial order of the 400 French Schneider. The Schneider was the French's first tank made, and it was named after the factory that produced it. The French also ordered 400 Saint-Chaumont tanks, but the tanks were not used until April 1917. In June 1916, 5 months after its combat demonstration to the British, the first production line tanks were ready, a bit too late, for use at the start of the year's big push for the Battle of the Somme, which began on the 1st of July in 1916.
Overall, the birth of the tank was essential to the 18th century because it helped us with the war and progressing farther than we could have gone in the war without them. The Landship Committee had agreed to the design of the tank, and without them there would be no tanks, and we would not be where we are today. Our country has strived to be the best, and with the evolution of the tank, we have succeeded in being the best in the war. Along with the tank, we have also become allies with the British because we let them use the first ever tank. They had used the tanks against Germany, but before they could actually use them, the tanks had to go through tests to make sure they were completely ready to be used and to make sure they were efficient enough to be used when the time came. But in order for the tanks to be used, we had to put together a track called Caterpillar tracks. Tanks used these to get across the muddy battlefield terrain. But overall, the first successful demonstration of the tank was in November of 1917 at the Battle of Cambrai. We had come so far not to have the best tanks possible, and without the tanks, we would not be as efficient in wars and fights as we are at the moment.